We are now going to add a crown to the monkey's head. In doing so, we will learn how to use the Pathfinder Unite Shape tool, learn about Illustrator's tools that allow us to quickly align and distribute several objects or anchor points as a group, and learn how to create and modify a gradient fill. So to start, we're going to draw a rectangle. We've already been over how to do this, so let's go ahead and grab the rectangle tool. And I'm going to start by hovering over the monkey's head, and I'm going to just have the crown sit directly on top of his head to start with. So I'm going to hover over here, just where it says intersect. Any point along this line, doesn't matter if your crown's a little bigger or smaller than mine. No big deal. So I'm going to click on this, I'm going to drag it over here to the other side, and then I'm going to come up about this high. Our crown is going to come off the artboard, and eventually we'll rescale everything so that the head and the crown fits in the artboard, but for now we're not too concerned about it. We're just going to let it go and let it do its thing. So I'm going to release this. Now I've already set the color to just a gold color. It doesn't really matter what you use, but here is the color. Again, feel free to pause the video in order to grab that color information and set it if you want to, or you can just find any gold you'd like. So now we need to add spikes onto this crown. If we look at this completed version of the monkey with a full body, you'll see that there are 3 spikes that come off the top of the crown. And in order to do that, if you haven't guessed already, we're going to use the pen tool, and we're going to use the pen tool, specifically the part that adds points. So all I need to do is hit the plus sign on my keyboard, and that will give me the pen tool with a plus sign. Now, all we're going to need to do is create 3 points on this line, right? Because we're going to use these 2 outside ones as the outer peaks, and then 1 point in the middle here is going to go right up to the center. And we need 2 points in here and here in order to be the valleys between those 2 points. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this. Now, this is nice because this point I know is more or less centered, but I'm going to go ahead and click there to add an anchor point. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to add one here and add one about halfway here. Now that I've added those 5 points, I'm going to use the hand tool so I can pull the artboard down in the window so that I can see what I'm doing and draw the crown off the top of the artboard. And the hand tool is either the hand icon over here in the toolbar, or if you hold down if you hit the H key on the keyboard, you also get the hand tool, and then you just click and drag to move the entire artboard. All right, so now I'm going to need my direct selection tool, or the letter A, in order to select these points. And I want to select the points that I'm going to be pulling up. So I want to select this anchor point here on the corner. I want to hold down Shift, select the middle anchor point, and with Shift still held down, I want to select this final anchor point on the other side. Now that I've done that, I can grab these anchors and lift them up. And if I hold down Shift while I'm lifting them up, it'll lock them in and force them to go up and down vertically, and they won't drift off to one side or the other, which isn't what we want right now. So I'm just going to pull these up until they're somewhere about here. All right, so I've pulled those up. You'll notice that things look a little bit skinnier here. These points aren't exactly the same, so this peak is off. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use some specialized tools to change that. Before we do that with these points, which are going to make really minor modifications, I'd like to do it, you use the exact same tools to do this with various objects. And so what I'd like to do is let's save where we're at really quickly in this file, and then go ahead and open a new file, and you just can hit Command or Control N on the keyboard to bring up the new document dialog. I'm going to leave the settings exactly the same as they are for everything else. Even if this is just the default stuff, we're just going to open this up, make some stuff, and discard it. So I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to grab the rectangle tool because it's my most quickly available tool, and I'm going to create let's do 4 rectangles. It doesn't matter what size they are, but just make sure they're not aligned. In fact, I'm going to grab one of these and I'm going to pull it pretty far down out of order with the rest of them. So to start with, and then something else that I'd like you to do is bring one of them really close to the other box, right? So we've got two that are really close here, and then these are more distributed across the page. And so what we need to do is we need to use the align tools in order to align these different objects. Let's say we want them all to be in a line, and we want them all to be equally spaced on that line. So I'm going to go ahead and grab all of these objects, and I just did that by using my selection tool and clicking and dragging across the page. And then once I've done that, in the toolbar at the top of the page, I have several options that we haven't discussed yet. The section that we're going to be working with right now is here. These are the alignment tools. And the first icon here, if I hover over it, it says align to selection. That's what we want. But there's several different options. So first, there is the align to artboard option. That means that we can use these alignment tools to actually center our artwork on the artboard. Or pull it to one side or the other, which is really useful and a quick way to get things centered when you need to do that. Align to key object, we'll talk about that as well, but that essentially means that it works just like align to selection, which we're going to work with first, but you can actually select one of the four objects and say, I don't want this object to move from where it is. I want everything else to move in relation to it. So that can be very helpful sometimes as well. All right, so align to selection. The first thing that we would like to do is to align these all so that they're all horizontally centered, right? And actually, the tool is called vertical align center. If you look at these different icons, they tell you what they do, right? The horizontal align center would actually align all of these guys on, on a vertical line. So if I click on horizontal align center, I'm going to undo this once I do it, but you can see that all of the pieces get smushed together onto one vertical line. So I'm going to undo that by hitting Command Z or Control Z. And instead what I want to do is I want to have them vertically aligned center. So I'm going to click on this, and they're all going to snap into line, right? That's pretty awesome if we have a bunch of stuff we're drawing and we want to make sure they are actually centered. Now, what I want to do at this point is I want these to be distributed evenly throughout this space. I want the gap between these two, and these two to be the same. And so all I do is I come up here and I have to float over here, and vertical distribute center that's not going to be right. I actually need to use the horizontal distribute center. So if I click on that, boom, right? They move over, these spaces are all equal, and we're good to go. Now, it's great that we can do this with objects. We can also do this with anchor points. And so let's go ahead and go back to our monkey face and our crown. And so what we're going to do is, if we just select these, let's go ahead and grab our direct selection tool. Now, if I was just to grab these 2 points and hit horizontal distribute center, it wouldn't do anything very useful. I'm actually going to need to select all 5 of these points. And to do that, I can click and drag with my direct selection tool and grab all of them. Now, you'll notice that when I did that, I also grabbed the background layer, which I did not want to do. So what I'm going to do before I go any further is I'm going to use my selection tool and just click off in space so nothing is selected. And then I'm going to go to the layers panel, and I'm going to lock the background layer, right? Remember, the empty box next to the eyeball locks the layer, so I'm going to make sure that that is locked. Now I'm going to grab my direct selection tool, and I'm going to click and drag so I can just grab those 5 points. Now, when I do this, occasionally when I was preparing for this demo, it would automatically select this align to key anchor option, which is the same as align to key object. And so then when I went and clicked horizontal distribute center, it did something totally unexpected. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. If you have this dashed line with a key in it, go ahead and change that to align to selection, right? You should have these 4 arrows inside this selection box. And now once I've done that, if I horizontal distribute center, you'll see that this point tweaked a little bit and these points moved a little bit. So now I know these are all distributed evenly in the space. So now we need to add the round parts on top of these points. And the fastest way to do that is to grab our ellipse tool, hover over the anchor, hold down Option, which is going to allow us to draw this out from the center, and just click once. And now we can say, all right, I want to set the width and height of this object. So I'm going to set these to 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And then I'm going to hit OK. And that's a little big, so maybe I will undo that and already be set. Okay, so I'm going to do, let's just say 90 pixels by 90 pixels. Okay, that's good enough. It's a little bit big still. If you want to make it 80, go ahead. That's great. I'm just going to move forward with what I've got. So I've got this one set. So now all I have to do is hold down Option, click once, and then hit Enter. And it'll draw another one. Hold down Option, click once, hit Enter. I've got my 3 circles added to the top of my crown. So I've got this bottom part of the crown and I've got these top pieces, but I really want this to be one unified object. In order to do that, I'm going to need to use a tool called the Pathfinder. Before I grab the Pathfinder though, let's go ahead and let's select all of these objects. All right, so I'm selecting all 3 of those and the crown, because these are the things we're actually going to unite. We're going to unify these. We're going to bring them together. So let's go to the Window menu option at the top of the screen. And if we go down, 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 the Pathfinder is about 2/3 of the way down. So if I click on this, it's going to bring up this free floating panel that has a couple of other options. Actually, all of my align tools are available here. And there's some actual ability to use, instead of transforming something by using your mouse and moving things around, you can actually do all of that here numerically, which is pretty great. Okay, but back to the Pathfinder. So the Pathfinder allows us to join our paths, subtract one path from another, only grab the intersecting parts of the path, or exclude those parts. And there's several other things that are really useful, like divide and trim and merge. And we'll talk about some of these options, but most of them are pretty self-explanatory. So to start with, let's try minus front, and we'll just see what happens. All right, so doing that, it has clipped off those circles, and I have these little dips in here now, right? Which is not what I want. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. What I actually want is the Unite tool, right? And so when I do that, you'll see that it joins the paths wherever these 2 things overlapped, and it gets rid of the overlapping sections, right? They just become one unified object, which is great. This is exactly... So now what we need to do is to make a more convincing fill for this crown. And we actually have to add a little bit more detail at the bottom, but we're going to wait to do that until we've made our gradient fill. So gradients are when you have a fill that goes from one color and fades slowly across the entire shape to another color. If we go up to the swatches, right, to our color picker here, you'll see that we have, and I'm going to zoom in a touch, you'll see that we have several default options here for gradients. Right? I'm going to select the most basic one, which is white to black. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to zoom out, and so you can see it starts white on the on the left-hand side of the screen, and it fades to black as it goes across the object. Now that's great and all, but we need to be able to, but it's not very useful if that's all we can do with it. So in order to access the options for this, there's 2 different tools we can use. One is a panel, and one is the gradient tool. We're going to start by looking at the gradient panel. The gradient panel is over here. Surprisingly enough, it looks like a gradient. So if I click on this, you'll see several options show up. First, it's telling me that this is a linear gradient, right? There are 2 types of gradients. There's linear and radial. You can go ahead and change it to radial right now just to see what the difference is, right? feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. The one radiates out from the center, the other is linear across the object. Let's go back to linear, so it's just easier to work with. You may notice that we can actually apply gradients to strokes as well. We're not going to do that right now, but you can do it. We can also change the angle at which the gradient operates at. So right now we're at 0. If we make this negative 180, then it's going to flip it backwards, right? So black's on the left side, white's on the right side. If we do negative 90, black's going to be on the bottom, white's going to be on the top. And if we do positive 90, black's going to be on top, white's going to be on bottom. Any other angle we set, say 135, right, we're going to get a diagonal gradient across the thing. And we can also set this to any angle we want, like say 26 degrees, right? So whatever angle we want this to be, we can set it to. But let's go ahead and to start with, I'm going to leave it at 0. I'm going to leave it set to the default. Now, something else you can do that's faster than changing the angle is you can also reverse the gradient. This little box here allows you to, while leaving this at 0, it allows you to flip this so that white and black are on the opposite sides. In order to change the colors of the gradient and how quickly the gradient fades from one color to another, you use this slider bar here. You'll see there's a white a house looking thing with a white block in it and a house looking thing with a black block in it. The black block is the black side, the white block is the white side, and there's this little diamond shape above it. The diamond shape above it, if you click and drag that, it allows you to basically balance how much white there's going to be and how much black there's going to be, or how quickly it goes from white to black. Right? If I pull this black out a little bit so we can actually see a black edge, I can get this so that fade is much shorter in time, or I can make it more gradual, right? Smooth it out. Okay, I'm going to pull this guy back to the back corner there. Okay, to change colors that we're using in our gradient, we just double click on these little sliders. So I'm going to double click on this guy, and you see that I can choose either to grab colors from the swatches panel, or I can go in here and set something from the spectrum, or I can set the numbers here, or I can set the web color. I can also very quickly choose black and white. So I'm just going to use my color picker, and I'm going to make this a yellow color. All right. And then let's say I want to go down to the other end, and I'm going to make this just because I want to make something hideous. This is not what gold looks like, right? Or a crown would look like. But I can choose magenta, right? And so now I have this fading from yellow to magenta. Now, that's not all we can do with a gradient. One thing we can do is if we select these, and by the way, you know which one of these is selected when it has the black triangle on top versus the gray triangle. So what we can do is if I select this, you'll notice I have this option for opacity. So I can actually make this end 0% opaque, or 20% opaque, or whatever I would like it to be, right? So I can fade not only the color, but I can also fade the transparency of the object as it goes from one side to the other. So it's 100% opaque here, and it's 0% here. All right, I am going to change this back to 100% for the time being. Okay, one last thing we can do is we can add more colors to our gradient. There is no reason why we should only have 2 colors. So if I hover my mouse over here, you'll notice a little plus sign shows up. And if I click, I get another color, and by default, it's whatever color was there, right? Whatever this blend is between this peach color between magenta and yellow, that's what shows up there. But I can then double click on this, and I could make it green, right? Or maybe cyan, that's gonna be even more beautiful, right? And so now I've got these 3 colors on this spectrum, on this gradient, and I can actually pull these 2 sliders now in so that the blue is really, or the cyan is very short, and I can move this over just a touch so it's more centered. All right, so now we've got this very thin blue line that fades pretty quickly both into yellow and into magenta. And I don't know how many different colors you can have in a gradient, but it's essentially infinite, right? I could drop another color here and make this orange or something like that, right? And then pull these sliders in just a little bit, maybe pull this guy even closer. So as you can see, you can add many, many different colors. Now, when people use Illustrator to mimic metals, gradients are one of their primary tools for how they get that effect to work. Now we are going to take what we've just learned about how to use gradients, and we're going to apply it by making a faux gold. Gold is really a mix of several different colors. I'm going to temporarily change this to this pre-saved version that I made earlier. It could use a couple more tweaks, but that's all right. It needs to be scaled a little bit. But so gold, right, it's not a single color. It's not just yellow. It's got yellow, it's got high bright highlights, it's got these brown, these warm brown colors that are the shadows. And oftentimes you'll notice, like, you know, the darkest color is next to one of the lighter tones. And so we need to go ahead and try and recreate this. Now, what you do at home and what I do for this to create this new swatch is going to be different than what we see here, but that's fine. So let's go ahead and open up our swatch menu here. And when we open this, the swatches up in this corner, if I zoom in a touch, there's an option up here, right? There's several different things we can do. One of which, if we hover over this, is to create a new swatch. So I'm going to go ahead and click New Swatch, and I'm going to call this, or we could just call this Gold Gradient Swatch. How about that? Okay, so I've created a new one. Whatever you had selected before is what it's going to create a duplicate of. So in this case, you guys might have a white black. I have this gold gradient. So I've got my gold gradient swatch created, and currently it's actually a gold gradient, but I'm going to go ahead and just destroy this thing. Something else that I haven't talked about yet is when you have a bunch of these sliders, you can actually, if you click on one and drag it away, it'll disappear, right? So I can just pluck these free, right? I'm going to get rid of, you have to have at least two, right? And let me go ahead and change this to white and this to black, so because that's about what you should have. You might have your original gradient in there, doesn't really matter. So we're starting out with the default. We've got black and white, and we need to modify this and make it gold. So to start with, I'm going to find a nice yellow gold color in this slider. That's a little green. There we go, that's looking better. All right. And so I've got this on one side. I know what the number is. I'm just going to go ahead and copy the number from here by hitting Command C or Control C if you're in Windows. I'm going to double click on my other slider. I'm going to select this. I'm going to hit Command V. Right? And then get rid of it. So now it's just one color, right? It's fading from itself into itself, so there's no gradient there whatsoever. But let's use this as our base color. And then let's start building up by adding some darker tones and some lighter tones. So I'm going to go ahead and drop another slider here, double click on it, and this one I want to be somewhat brown. Right? Okay. And now that I've got this brown one here, let's go ahead and create a highlight as well. So I'm going to drop another slider here, and I'm going to click on white. But then I'm going to pull some yellow into it, because using these independent sliders, I can say, all right, this is my blue slider. If I reduce the amount of blue, it actually makes the color more yellow. Right? So I don't want this to be totally white, but I want it to be pretty close. There we go. And now if I wanted to, I could pull this even closer to this dark shadow. Right? And I could pull this closer. I could make a really hard line here if I wanted to. But this is a crown, it's rounded, so we do want some change. And actually what I'd really like to do is pull both of these a little bit further away from that edge. There we go. So now I'm going to need another couple areas of dark color and at least another highlight on here. And so I'm going to add 2 more over here. I'm going to make this one brown, but I'm going to make it not quite so dark as the other one. Right? And so I want this to be a warmer brown. There we go. Something like that works. And then this color I want to be, again, I want it to be a highlight, but again, I'm not going to have it be quite as bright. So to do that, I could pull this just down a little bit. Actually, this one needs to be up a little bit, right? So it's a little bit higher. And then I'm going to add one more that's somewhat closer to the original colors. So I'm actually going to grab the original color, select it, copy it, and paste it in here. Now, I'm not doing this very scientifically at all, right? And that's a little bit broad, so I'm actually going to pull these guys in just a touch. And on this side, I really want the fade to be a lot less severe, right? Because we don't want these to be uniform. I do want this to be a little bit darker. I'll just pull a little bit more red in there, and maybe just a touch more green, but just a little bit. Maybe bring the blue up a touch too, because that'll brown it out a little bit. Okay. All right, and so again, these don't have to be perfect. This is annoying me. It's a little bit too true. And so I'm just going to pull that up a little bit higher, and so it blends a little bit nicer with the colors around it. Okay. And then maybe on this one I actually bring the slider out a bit and slide this guy over a touch. But make this one a little bit harder. Okay. So now I've got this base gradient. Now the nice thing about gradients is this isn't set in stone. I can always come back and modify this, change the colors, do whatever I need to do until I'm happy with the result. So this is how I can modify the settings on a gradient with the gradient panel. Now, the gradient tool allows us to do a lot of those same things and make some other fundamental changes as well, really easily and pretty intuitively. So if I click on the gradient tool, we get this bar, all right, that initially is just a white bar. If I hover over it, you can see the gradient across the entire thing. And you'll notice that because this crown, right, goes from here to here, the gradient is currently the entire length of the object. I can actually grab the end of this and I can squish this. So all the colors are there, the proportions remain the same, but I'm actually bringing it, smushing it all over so these highlights and everything are a little bit more confined. And I can move this by clicking on this end. So I can slide this back and forth. So I can set like, oh, I really want those brown highlights to be right there for some reason, right? Which is not exactly what I want to do. But if I want these to be set in a very particular place, if I need to make this smaller, I could make it much smaller. And when you make it much smaller, it just takes whatever that end color is and fills in all the way to the edge of the object that has not been used, right? So that's a little bit too narrow. I'm going to pull this out a touch, pull this over. And I'm still not quite happy with this, but it is starting to look somewhat reflective. Oh, and so I can also, right, I don't have to go back to the panel to change things. I can actually double click on these little house-shaped structures, and I can change the color, I can change the opacity, and I can actually change the location on the slider by setting it here numerically. So if I'm unhappy with this and I want this to be a little bit more yellow, and here actually maybe I need it to be a little bit more white, I can do that. And then if I need to pull this in a little bit and make this edge a little bit harder, maybe this guy needs to be a little bit harder, right? Who knows what I want? But all of that can be changed there. Something else you can do is you can rotate this freehand. If you hover just beyond the edge of the square end of the bar, you can click and drag and rotate this so the angle of the gradient changes, right? If you hold down Shift, it's going to force it into 0, 90, 180, or 45 degrees increments. Right, for our intents and purposes, we might want this to just be a little bit off. But let's go ahead and, oops, let's undo that. That's not what we want. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave it square for now. And I'm going to pull it back over. I just wanted to show you that this is another way that you can very freely control what this looks like. Now that we've got the gradient set, what we need to do is we need to use the selection tool, and we actually want to rotate our entire crown. But before we do that, there's something else we want to do. If we were to rotate this, once you've rotated something, it's hard to align another object to it, right? Like we want a little band that pops out a little bit beyond the edge of the crown to be set here, right? Like a rim on the bottom of the crown. And once we have something set to a particular angle, it's just kind of a pain in the butt to rotate another object to the same angle quickly and get it set. Well, whereas if everything starts out square to the artboard, it makes life a lot easier to draw it square than to do so later. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the rounded rectangle tool, which if I just click and hold right on this, I can go and grab the rounded rectangle. I'm going to go to the very center of the crown, and I'm going to hold down the Option key. I'm going to click and drag. Right? And I'm going to pull this out until it just is a little bit beyond the edges of the crown, and I'm going to release. You'll already notice that the gold has been transferred to the new object. Now, if you've ever looked at a reflective object, and this is where observation and looking at things is really useful, and I'm not looking at anything gold or shiny right now, so I'm doing this off of memory. If you have something that you want to appear as though it's in front of another reflective object, right? They're both reflective, but this actually sticks out in three-dimensional space a little bit beyond this. We're going to need to move the gradient and adjust it a little bit in order to get it to look right. It looks right over here, right? This reflective line should be a little bit ahead of this one, but on this side, we actually want this dark band to be a little bit on this side of the dark band, and that'll give us more of the illusion that this band is in front of the rest of the crown. So I'm going to use the gradient tool to start with, and I'm going to scoot this stuff over until I get that set, and then I'm going to pull this out and just stretch it a little bit. Right? And then I'm going to deselect this so I can see what's going on. Also, this band was a little bit taller, which I think looks better, so I'm going to bolster this guy up a little bit, make him a little bit heavier. I'm going to use the same stroke weight for everything else I've used in the drawing, which is 6-point stroke. So I'm going to select both of these and come up here, 6 points, and now it's starting to look like the rest of the image. Whoops. Right, now we don't have any shading on the face yet. We're going to take care of that in the next tutorial. But great, we've got our crown. Now you can go in and you can change these colors, you can modify this, you can make it look like a silver crown. There's all sorts of different options you could do at this point. There's tons of tutorials online as well that go into explicit detail about how to make different metal finishes or give the illusion of that, from stainless steel and like brushed steel, everything, even stuff with like rust and stuff on it. It's pretty amazing what people can do. I'm going to hold down Shift, select both of these objects. Now at this point, I want to rotate these. I want them to rotate together, and they are one object, right? They are the crown. So I want to turn them into a group. So I'm going to hit Command or Control G to group them. And then before I go any further, I'm going to go to my Layers panel. I'm going to find this group, and because it's annoying to look at a bunch of groups, I'm just going to say crown as the new name. All right, so I've got my crown. And so now I want to rotate it so it's sort of sliding off his head a little bit. It looks a little cockeyed. He's pretty sad. His crown's probably not going to be right on top of his head unless it's his birthday and he's an introvert. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this guy. That might be a little bit too much, so I'm going to pull this back a little bit. I'm going to nudge this around by using the arrow keys on the keyboard until I'm happy with the placement. And there we are. I am actually very happy with where I have that crown placed. Again, I'm probably going to go in and adjust these colors a little bit. That yellow is just too strong. It needs to be a little bit darker. But yeah, so within this brief tutorial, we have learned how to use the Pathfinder tool to unite things, how to distribute and align objects and anchor points using the align tools, and how to work with gradients and create our own custom gradient that mimics a metallic surface.